No creo que entiendas con lo que estás jugando, Mark, dijo el agente, con una voz calmada pero llena de amenaza. Necesitas dejar de investigar esto. Hay mucho más en juego de lo que te imaginas. Mark no titubeó. Había estado en peores situaciones antes. Sé exactamente lo que estoy buscando, dijo. Y no me detendré hasta encontrar lo que pasó con Sam. El agente sonrió, una sonrisa delgada, casi burlona. No sabes el poder contra el que te enfrentas. El gobierno no juega según las reglas que tú conoces. Después del encuentro con el agente, Mark se dio cuenta de que ya no solo estaba luchando contra un sistema, estaba luchando por su vida. Necesitaba aliados, y eso significaba ponerse en contacto con aquellos que habían pasado por las mismas operaciones. Contactó a Sarah Fields, una oficial de inteligencia que había dejado el servicio en circunstancias misteriosas años atrás. Ella conocía las operaciones secretas del gobierno, y Mark sabía que era su mejor oportunidad para obtener más respuestas. Cuando Sarah finalmente aceptó encontrarse, Mark no sabía qué esperar. Había oído rumores sobre ella, rumores de que se había desencantado con el sistema y ahora vivía oculta. Pero cuando se sentaron, el comportamiento de Sarah fue tranquilo, casi resignado. Estás persiguiendo un fantasma, Mark, dijo Sarah. El gobierno tiene sus garras profundas en esto. Si sigues cavando, serás su próxima víctima. Los ojos de Mark se endurecieron. No me importa. Sam era un buen hombre. No dejaré que lo olviden. Cuanto más se acerca Mark a la verdad, más peligrosa se vuelve su persecución. Cuanto más se adentra, más descubre que los secretos que está a punto de exponer pueden costarle más de lo que está dispuesto a pagar. La investigación de Markstone había llegado demasiado lejos. Lo que comenzó como una simple búsqueda de un amigo desaparecido se había convertido en una lucha por descubrir los secretos más oscuros del gobierno. Pero cuanta más información desenterraba, más.
File, marked, confidential, that had been buried with other forgotten relics. It contained the names of soldiers who had gone missing in covert operations, and next to Sam's name, there was something strange, presumed dead, no further information. As Mark pieced together the fragments of the puzzle, he began to understand something terrifying. Sam's disappearance wasn't an accident. It was part of a larger operation, a covert government mission that had gone terribly wrong. But the more he uncovered, the more dangerous his journey became. Mark knew that exposing the truth would not be simple. The government had invested too much into keeping these secrets buried, and the people involved in this cover-up would stop at nothing to protect it. They were watching him, his every move, hoping he would back down. But Mark had lived a lifetime of risks. He wasn't backing down now. Mark's investigation led him to an old military base, one that had been shut down years ago but still held valuable clues. There, he met Sarah Fields, an intelligence officer who had been part of the operation Sam had been involved in. Sarah had left the service under mysterious circumstances, but Mark knew she had answers. The problem was getting her to talk. "I'm not here to hurt you, Sarah," Mark said, his voice steady but urgent. "I just need to know what happened to Sam." Sarah hesitated, looking over her shoulder before speaking. "You don't know what you're asking for, Mark. The truth isn't something you can handle. It's bigger than anything you've dealt with before." Sarah eventually agreed to help Mark. She revealed that Sam had been part of a secret government program designed to conduct risky, high-stakes missions that were never supposed to be acknowledged. The people involved in these operations were considered expendable, their existence erased once the job was done. Sam had been a part of that world, and he had learned things that could destroy the government's reputation. Forever. Mark's search was no longer just about finding a missing comrade. It was about uncovering a truth so dangerous that the government would go to any lengths to protect it. The more he learned, the more he realized that the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. As Mark gets closer to the truth, the government's dark hand tightens around him. Every step he takes towards revealing their secrets brings him closer to an enemy he can't outrun. Mark Stone's investigation had already uncovered more than he'd expected, but with each new piece of information, the stakes grew higher. The deeper he dug, the more he realized that Sam Miller's disappearance wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a larger conspiracy that the government had worked tirelessly to cover up. In his search for answers, Mark encountered a pattern, one that seemed too precise to be coincidence. Sam was part of a covert government operation that involved elite soldiers going on top-secret missions. These soldiers were often given dangerous tasks and, when the job was done, erased from existence. Mark was not just looking for a missing person, he was looking for a trail that could lead to the government's darkest secrets. The more he uncovered, the more he understood that Sam's disappearance was just the tip of the iceberg. Mark's search took him to the old military base, a place that had been shut down years ago, but one that still held remnants of the operations that had taken place there. Inside the decaying walls of the base, he found documents, files detailing the top-secret missions that had gone wrong, soldiers who had gone missing under mysterious circumstances, and evidence of a cover-up. But someone else was watching. As Mark went through the files, he felt a cold presence behind him. It was a subtle sensation, but it was there. He wasn't alone. He turned slowly, half expecting to see one of his old colleagues from the military, but instead, he saw someone much more dangerous. "I don't think you understand what you're playing with, Mark," the agent said, his voice calm but full of menace. "You need to stop looking into this. There's a lot more at stake here than you realize." Mark didn't flinch. He had been in far worse situations before. "I know exactly what I'm looking for," he said. "And I'm not going to stop until I find out what happened to Sam." The agent's smile was thin, almost a smirk. "You don't know the power you're up against. The government doesn't play by the rules you're used to." After the encounter with the agent, Mark realized that he was no longer just fighting against a system, he was fighting for his life. He needed allies, and that meant reaching out to those who had been through the same kind of operations. He contacted Sarah Fields, an intelligence officer who had left the service under mysterious circumstances years ago. She had knowledge of the secret government operations, and Mark knew she was his best chance at getting more answers. When Sarah finally agreed to meet, Mark didn't know what to expect. He had heard rumors about her, rumors that she had become disillusioned with the system and was now living in hiding. But when they sat down, Sarah's demeanor was calm, almost resigned. "You're chasing a ghost, Mark," Sarah said. "The government has its claws deep in this. If you keep digging, you'll be their next victim." Mark's eyes hardened. "I don't care. Sam was a good man. I won't let him be forgotten." Sarah eventually handed Mark a folder filled with documents that had been classified for decades. Inside, there were lists of soldiers who had been part of secret operations, each marked, presumed dead, no further information. One of those names was Sam Miller. "These soldiers were part of something much bigger than you or I ever realized," Sarah said, her voice low. "They were involved in operations that were so classified, they didn't even exist in official records." Mark flipped through the files, each one confirming what he already suspected: the government had been running dangerous experiments, using soldiers like pawns in a game of national security. They were sent on missions that were so risky, they had to be erased once they were done. But why didn't they just kill them? Mark asked. Sarah's eyes darkened. Because the government had bigger plans. They needed to use these soldiers for something far worse. Sam knew too much. And now, they're trying to cover it all up. As Mark got closer to the truth, the government's grip on him tightened. His every move was being watched, and soon, threats began to escalate. He had crossed a line that the government couldn't allow anyone to cross. One night, as Mark walked down a dark street, he was ambushed by a group of men in black suits. They were professionals, trained operatives whose sole job was to eliminate threats. Mark fought back, using his old training to take down the men one by one. But he knew it wouldn't be long before more came. As he made his way back to his hideout, he realized that he was no longer just searching for answers, he was in the middle of something much larger. The government had lost control, and they were doing whatever it took to protect their secrets. As Mark delves deeper into the conspiracy, his world begins to fracture. The closer he gets to the truth, the more dangerous his pursuit becomes, and the more the government tightens its grip on him. Mark Stone's investigation was reaching dangerous levels. The documents Sarah had given him revealed much more than he could have ever anticipated. The operation that Sam Miller had been part of was no ordinary mission. It was part of a covert program that had been operating for years, a program that involved not only high-risk missions but also the manipulation and erasure of soldiers who had learned too much. Sam had been one of those soldiers, one of the few who had survived long enough to piece together the full extent of the government's hidden agenda. But the closer Mark got to uncovering the full truth, the more he realized that his every move was being tracked. Every door he opened seemed to lead to another closed one, and every question he asked made him a bigger target. The government, it seemed, would stop at nothing to silence him. Mark spent sleepless nights piecing together the fragments of evidence, each clue leading him down a darker path. The government had not only erased Sam from their records, they had erased everyone involved in this operation. Every soldier, every operative, every mission was now part of a hidden history that no one could acknowledge. But Mark was determined to expose it all. One night, as Mark reviewed more documents, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat: Project Phoenix. It was the codename for the covert operation that Sam and other soldiers had been part of. But the files on Project Phoenix weren't just about secret missions, they were about experiments, psychological warfare, and unlawful military trials. The soldiers had been used as test subjects in dangerous, high-risk operations with no regard for their well-being. The government had manipulated them, erased their identities, and forced them into operations that were never meant to be exposed. Mark knew that what he was uncovering wasn't just about Sam's disappearance, it was about the government's hidden legacy. If he could bring this information to the surface, it would bring down the entire program. But the stakes were higher than ever before. Mark had already seen what the government would do to protect these secrets, and he knew the price he would pay for exposing them. As Mark delved deeper, the threats became more direct. One evening, as he was preparing to meet with a contact who had crucial information about Project Phoenix, he received a phone call. The voice on the other end was familiar. "Mark, you're getting too close," the voice said. "You're in over your head. You need to stop before it's too late." It was Mason, a former military colleague who had always been the one to warn him about getting involved in things too dangerous. Mark didn't respond at first, he wasn't sure if Mason was trying to help or trying to keep him in the dark. "I know what you're doing," Mason continued, his voice serious. "The government is watching. If you keep pushing, you won't just put yourself in danger, you'll drag everyone you care about into this." Mark's jaw clenched. He had heard this before. Everyone around him had always warned him to stop, told him to let go of the past. But he wasn't going to stop until he had the truth. "I'm not backing down," Mark said firmly. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about the truth. And I'm going to find it." The next day, Mark received another threat, a more personal one. His apartment had been ransacked, his files and documents scattered across the floor. But the most disturbing thing was the message left behind: "Stay away from Project Phoenix. You're not going to like what you find." Mark had crossed a line now. The government wasn't just monitoring him, they were actively trying to stop him. But he couldn't back down. The truth was out there, and he was going to find it, no matter the cost. He began to realize that every step he took toward uncovering the truth put those closest to him in danger. The government had resources beyond anything he could imagine, and they weren't afraid to use them. But Mark had one thing they didn't: determination. And that was something the government couldn't buy or silence. Mark's next move was risky. He decided to meet with a former operative who had worked on Project Phoenix. The man, David Carter, had been part of the program but had disappeared after the operation ended. Carter was rumored to know everything about what had really happened during those missions. If anyone could give Mark the missing pieces of the puzzle, it was Carter. Was rumored to know everything about what had really happened during those missions. If anyone could give Mark the missing pieces of the puzzle, it was Carter. The meeting was set in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. But when Mark arrived, he found something unexpected. The cafe was empty. And as he looked around, he realized he wasn't alone. A government agent had been waiting for him. The man was sitting in a corner, watching Mark with cold, calculating eyes. "You shouldn't be here, Stone," the agent said, his voice low. "You're getting too close to the truth. And when you get too close, people start to disappear." Mark's hand instinctively went to his pocket, where he kept a small pistol. But he didn't reach for it. He wasn't afraid. He had come too far to turn back now. "I'm not afraid of you," Mark said, meeting the agent's gaze. "I've seen worse." The agent stood up and walked towards him, his face expressionless. "You'll regret this. The truth you're looking for isn't something you want to uncover. Some things are better left buried. As Mark closes in on the truth, the government will stop at nothing to silence him. But the deeper he goes, the more he realizes the true cost of exposing the secrets that could tear everything apart. Mark Stone had come too far. His investigation had led him down a path from which there was no turning back. Every step closer to the truth made it more dangerous for him, and for those around him. The government's reach had been long, and their methods were ruthless. But Mark knew one thing: the secrets he was uncovering could change everything. He sat in a small, dimly lit room, surrounded by the files that had led him to this point. Project Phoenix. The covert operation that had claimed so many lives. The same project that had erased the names of soldiers, like Sam Miller, and replaced them with false reports of death. The documents Sarah had given him were the key. Mark's cell phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. It was an encrypted message from Sarah. He opened it quickly. "They know you're close. Be careful. I've seen their plans." The warning was too late. Mark's phone rang again, this time from an unknown number. He answered, his heart racing. "Mark," a voice said, "this is Agent Collins. We need to talk. You're in deeper than you realize. If you keep going, it won't just be your life at risk, it'll be everyone's." Mark's jaw tightened. "I'm not stopping. I've seen what you're hiding, and I'm going to expose it." The agent sighed on the other end. "Then you'll die knowing the truth, Mark. But you'll never live to see it come to light." Mark didn't hesitate. He had already risked too much to turn back now. He arranged a meeting with a contact who was involved in the upper echelons of the operation. A man who had been part of Project Phoenix and who had information that could destroy the entire program. This man, known only as the Handler, had been pulling strings behind the scenes for years. If Mark could meet him, he would finally have the full picture. The location was a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. Mark arrived early, scanning the area for any signs of surveillance. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. This meeting had to go perfectly. It was his last chance to expose the government's darkest secret. Mark entered the warehouse cautiously, his hand on his sidearm. Inside, he found the Handler, waiting for him in the shadows. "You're braver than I thought, Mark," the Handler said, his voice low and calculated. "You know what's at stake here. You think you can expose us without consequences?" "I'm not here for your threats," Mark replied, his voice cold. "I'm here to get the truth. And you're going to give it to me." The Handler chuckled darkly. "Truth? The truth is a weapon, my friend. And once you unleash it, there's no putting it back in the box. You have no idea what you're really dealing The handler pulled out a folder and slid it across the table toward Mark. "Everything you've uncovered, it's all in here. But once you see it, there's no turning back. The government will make sure of that." Mark took the folder, his hand steady despite the chaos swirling in his mind. As he opened the folder, the truth hit him like a hammer. The operation he had uncovered, Project Phoenix, wasn't just about covert missions. It was about shaping history. The government had been orchestrating events in the world to create the ideal geopolitical environment, using soldiers as pawns in their game. Sam Miller had been one of the soldiers manipulated and discarded when he became a liability. Mark had been chasing the ghost of a man who had been used and then erased, all for the sake of power. And now Mark had the evidence, documents, recordings, and photos, enough to bring the entire operation to light, but as Mark stood up, ready to leave with the evidence, he heard a sound behind him. The door to the warehouse slammed open, and a group of heavily armed government agents stormed in. It was a trap. Mark's heart raced as he drew his gun, but the agents were too many. They had been waiting for him to make his move. "You really thought you could walk out of here with the truth, Mark?" Agent Collins's voice rang out. Mark's mind raced. He had no choice now. He had to fight his way out or die trying. The firefight that ensued was brutal. Mark moved quickly, using his years of training to take down agent after agent. He knew he couldn't afford to miss. Every shot he took could be his last. But as the dust settled and the smoke cleared, Mark stood victorious, only for a brief moment. He had the truth. But at what cost?